You're watching the Sustainable Business Network. I'm Wendy Buckley and I'm chair of the Northants SBN and also client director over here at Carbon Footprint. This is the recording from our session on renewable energy on site from the 3rd of February 2023. We hope you enjoy it.
Today's session is incredibly topical, and I don't think I could have anticipated there being so much fire out there in the media this morning from the Times investigation of enforced meters, prepayment meters in homes. So the whole topic around here of energy and taking control of it has never been more important. Okay, moving on then. What you'll see on screen at the moment is the agenda for today. And as I say, we've got lots of content in here. First of all, we've got my colleague Zoe Booth, who'll do a legal and market update as usual, and followed up with delighted to have Martin Heath on renewables on site in your business, followed by Alison Zarecki, Ollie Pendert and Jane Grindy on community energy projects, really giving that control back. And finally, Alison is going to cover off funding opportunities right at the end of the session there. You'll see we do have a QR code on screen. I'm sure that a lot of you have already pulled your phones out to see what that's about. That is the feedback form for this session. It might seem a little bit early to fill that in, but within that, we, as well as getting feedback on today's sessions, we'd like to know the content you'd like us to cover in these sessions going forward. So please do get that up on your phones. Maybe don't fill that in just yet. On to our first speaker, and it's Zoe Booth from Carbon Footprint with a legal and market update. Over to you, please, Zoe.
Thanks, Wendy. Let me just screen share. Should be able to see that now. So let's just have a look at what's been happening in the world recently. So we've had a lot of positive aviation news here. You can see there a couple of successful test flights using hydrogen, which is really great news. Contrast to that, we've kind of got the results from the climate inequality report for 2023, which came out this month. In that, the main kind of outcomes there are that we are now looking at kind of more divide within countries than between them in emissions. And that's kind of illustrated nicely kind of by our very own Rishi Sunak there, who got quite a bit of backlash, as you probably know, for jetting off to Blackpool rather than using some more kind of climate friendly options. On our second slide here, we've got a kind of bit of a theme here, just following back on to what Wendy mentioned a minute ago. Obviously, what everyone is thinking about at the moment is energy with the war in Ukraine and the rising cost of living. But we've actually got lots of positive news stories here for renewables, with lots of records being broken there across Europe and the US as well, actually. There are also more calls kind of for funding on home installation and new tech pumps there as well. So hopefully we'll see more of that going forward from the government. Just circling back slightly to the climate inequality report, just some of the key highlights here. Obviously, we all know that inequality in contribution and impacts happens. A lot of our global policy focuses on country to country progress, but essentially this is just highlighting that now actually we're looking at greater inequality between countries, between kind of some of the more affluent members of society to those who are less well off, shall we say. So that's kind of the main outcome there. And that circles back nicely to those wins such as the zero avia ones that we saw on that first slide, where there's actually quite a lot of opportunity there for some of the private jets. For example, with the 19-seater plane that we had from zero avia, hopefully this can kind of start to impact that top 1% emissions that you see there as well. Circling to ESOS now, obviously you all probably have heard of ESOS. Most of you that are in it will have definitely had this on your radar in the last kind of 6 months or so. So we've just got a little reminder of the dates there for the qualification, which was the 31st of December just gone, and the compliance deadline, which is this December coming. Last time we kind of looked at the results of the consultation that the government was working on. What we found this time is that despite their statement that they would be moving to 95% or in terms of materiality to cover for ESOS, they've actually not officially changed that yet. So there are other positive reasons to use that 95%, but the official number is still 90 at the moment. They're also working with BSI on revision of one of their PAS documents for the ESOS, as well as a new edition, which the consultation will open for on February. So please do have a look at that. We will have the link at the end as well for you to go and have a look. The aim of the new one is to allow companies to voluntarily, at this point, include net zero targets or plans. And this is something that we might see more of in phase 4, but that's to be confirmed. And we always like to kind of have a little bit of a look back at what has happened. So just looking at what came out of ESOS phase 2. So we've actually got some really interesting numbers here. So lots of kind of notices issued there by the Environment Agency. So they've obviously been doing their auditing. And actually only 30% of submissions were compliant the first time, with 63% needing remedial action. Now, we'd like to think that most of these have been corrected now, but you can see there that that is quite a big number and something to kind of address for phase 3 and 4. And just looking at fines, and we've got a water company back in, as usual, sadly. So there's quite a big one here, lots of devastation to kind of local fisheries in Northamptonshire by Anglian Water. Obviously, we would like to think that these are now taking kind of rectifying actions here as well. You've also got a similar one from the Cleansing Services Group, which were fined quite a large sum of money there for treating sewage without a permit, which is obviously not great news. And in addition to that, we've got another custodial sentence from a man in Essex who was sentenced to prison for waste offences from fly tipping, essentially. There are all of the links on here for you to go and have a look at in your own time, just to get a little bit more reading around there. But if you do have a specific question, please feel free to email me. My email address is just at the bottom there for you.
Great. Thank you very much, Zoe. That's always interesting, fascinating. I think a lot of us always have this particular interest in the fines, and it's good to see the EA coming good on some of the things that they laid down over policies they laid down over the last few years. We've got something a little bit different for you now, and I will just take the screen. It is poll time. So what we're asking today, if you can please take out your phones and scan in the QR code. I think Joel is going to put the link to the poll in the chat just now. So those of you that can't use a QR code, please use this. We're asking two really basic questions today on the topic of renewable energy on site. The first one being, have you got some renewable energy on site? By which I mean an installation. I'm not interested here on whether you've got a renewable tariff from the grid. I want to know whether you've got renewable equipment. This could be solar powers, ground source heat pump, etc. So if you could, that's the first question. Have you got any renewables on site at the moment? The second question is, if you haven't got renewables on site at the moment, why not? No, it's not an extensive list of options here down there, but if you could just take the one that applies the most here. What I would say with this poll is it's completely anonymous, so we don't know who's saying what. It's just going to help us to get a sense of what's going out out there, who's already got the renewables, and some of the main reasons why you might not have them. So if you could just take a moment, we'll give you a few seconds there to just call that up either on your screen or on your phone. And then what I'm going to do is I'll ask Joel, who's managing the poll today, to share the screen, and we'll be able to see the results coming in live there. So please do scan that QR code just quickly, and Joel's going to take the screen from me there. Okay. Great. I can see those numbers are still coming in there. Okay, right. Joel, is your mic on there? Perhaps you want to talk us through what we're seeing. This looks very interesting.
Right. So by the looks of things, we've got a near even split on yes, people have got renewables. It just seemed to be fluctuating a bit at the moment, but I guess we'll see. The no's being slightly more there at the moment. And the biggest reason why people aren't able to have renewables is that the site is owned by a landlord. And
that's interesting. That's interesting. I'm sure one of our speakers might comment on what's possible within leases and things like that.
Yeah, and then other seems to be taking a 35% share. So I have gotten a why other section, but that's not currently visible just because it's got lots of responses that would have to read through. But I can, I think, have a look at that if I look at the results somehow. But the most recent one said that there's a lack of management into real green schemes. So that seems like so management issues might be one of the problems within your company. But the options on screen do make up at least 2/3 of the responses so far.
Very interesting. Great. I'm now delighted to welcome Martin Heath to present on renewables on site in your business. Martin, over to you, please.
So yeah, I mean that was fascinating. The responses from that survey. So yeah, I might make a few comments on that in a minute. But first of all, yeah, many thanks to SBM for arranging the session today, and it's great to see so many people here. I think it's really a bit of a difficult presentation to pitch because there's such a breadth of experience amongst the audience and experience as the survey's just shown. So I pitched it roughly in the middle. So there's going to be people on this call probably who have more expertise in solar than I have, and there's other people who are relatively new to this area. So it's about the middle, but no excuses or apologies. I'm sort of an engineer, and science and technology is the thing I've been doing all my career. So lots of numbers, lots of graphs, but I try and explain them as best I can. I also spent 25 years financing major high-tech capital projects, satellites, telecoms networks, etc. So I've also got some relatively sophisticated financial analysis. But again, I'm trying to pitch it in the middle so we can all understand it. But if there are questions, happy to take them afterwards, or indeed have another session sometime in the future to go into more detail on any of the points that I've covered today. So really, I'm aiming this at perhaps the 55% of people who haven't got solar on their roofs at the moment, but on the other 45%, you can always get some more. And really tackle that issue around expensive and costs and the myths around this. And hence my question, or the question I was asked to delve into this morning: why should I invest in solar? Key point there is this is an investment. This is not a cost. And hopefully at the end of this, we can see why that's the case. If we ended the presentation today or now, these are probably the 5, 6, 7 things you need to take away from it. It's all about, in terms of commercial roof space, what is your roof? Find a good roof. It needs to be pointing in the right direction, although we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, of the right pitch, the right age, and made of the right stuff. One of the critical issues is balancing how you generate solar PV and how you use the electricity on site. Your internal electrical distribution system is often a barrier, an underestimated barrier. So many big sites have quite substantial submains in terms of electrical cables. We need to understand the ability for those cables to take the power that we might want to push down them in terms of voltage drops and general current capabilities of the cable. And working out the business case, the hard business case, and by the hard business case, I mean the numbers, the money. How much will my solar PV generate? The yield. How much will I use on site? What revenues will I generate? What are the savings and the costs? Happy to talk to any finance directors or CEOs who want to go in deeply into the business case. But there is a very strong business case for solar PV for many people. There's also softer benefits about emissions reductions, benefits to employees, wider community, the suppliers, and it makes a very powerful and visible statement about your commitment to doing something about climate change. But the two key points I want to make really is the value of a solar PV system is in its design and its optimization. It's not just in the installation. And the final point, if I was to end now, is that the potential benefits are huge if it's put into the right place at the right time. So let's go back and delve into that in a little bit more detail. So I just really want to cover very, very briefly what is PV. And there are quite a lot of you, many people already know what that is, but what drives the investment case? That's really about finding out how much electricity you can generate, how much it will cost, and how much you will save. And we've got to the stage now where it's actually now cheaper for many people to make your own electricity, much cheaper to make it yourself than to buy it from the grid. We're seeing lifetime costs of electricity of the order of 6 to 10p a kilowatt hour. i.e. that's the cost of making the stuff yourself. I want to look at this probably three key areas. I wanted to cover the technical, how can you make this and at what cost? Financial, how do you combine the costs and the revenues and look at risks? There are some legal issues, and that'd be very fascinating. It'd be fascinating if other people comment on this, and that really goes down to that other point on the survey about how do you deal with landlords and leases. And there's plenty of ways through that now, and I think maybe some of the other speakers will talk much more about that. Having a leased building is no longer a barrier to putting solar PV on the roof. I wanted to cover a little bit about other technologies, but won't go into any depth. Clearly, I'm talking about solar PV, but there are other possibilities: wind, tide, river, hydro, AD. But and we can also have a long discussion in the future about batteries, but that's again another subject. And of course, there's renewable heat and heat networks. But today, it's around solar PV. It's on the roofs, and it's about the technical and financial aspects. A little bit about Basingstoke Energy Co-op. Well, we've been around since 2012, installing solar PVs of some of the largest organisations in the county. We tend to focus within 20, 30, 40 miles of Basingstoke. We've worked for the sorts of organisations you can see there. London Fire Brigade, a major rollout programme for them in putting solar PV on fire stations across London. We also did all the feasibility studies as well for London Fire Brigade, so they could work out the business case. We've done a lot of work with community energy groups, which feeds into what the other speakers are talking about, and of course a lot of work in the commercial space. We've been doing this now for 10 years. I think we got to that stage where we nearly know what we're doing. Here's some examples of the sorts of solar PV installations we've done. Pretty standard stuff, ranging from small domestic installations to large-scale commercial rooftops. And as you can see, there are quite a few that we've done. These are all in and around Basingstoke, apart from the one in the top middle. That's someone cleaning solar panels in the world's first installation of a solar PV farm connected directly to the traction network of a railway grid. And Basingstoke Energy Co-op was one of the designers, installers of that system. Something we're proud about, a world first for Basingstoke. So yeah, it's relatively straightforward, really. Here's an example. We recently put about 110 kilowatts on the roof of the Braywick Leisure Centre, which is in Maidenhead, brand new building. So what happens? Well, it's broadly these sorts of steps. The equipment arrives, often in the back of a lorry. In this particular case, there's a telehandler for getting the stuff on the roof, but it also comes in pallets. We lift the panels or the modules onto the roof. We attach them to the roof through rails and clamps, cable it all up, and then connect it to the grid. As it says, job done. Clearly, that's the relatively straightforward bit. The questions are about, what equipment, where should I put it, how do I connect it, does it actually work? For instance, this is a little bit more detail on the connection to the grid. That's a 110 kilowatt inverter. And you can imagine the amount of power coming out of that when we're talking about hundreds of amps at quite high voltages, in this case 400 volts. And the electrical design side of solar PV is not something to be underestimated, particularly in a large site where you might have submains, you may have a lot of cables around the site. But again, that's something that needs to be carefully considered because this is pretty high powers in some cases. Moving on. So what do we need then? If we're going to look at solar PV on any site, the very first thing is let's think about what makes a good site. The critical first thing is the roof. That's where we are going to be putting our solar PV. Critically, it depends on which way it's facing and its pitch. Now, historically, most people will say anything between southeast and southwest is fine, and it is. But also, we're beginning to find now that north-facing roofs, which are low-pitched, i.e., so perhaps 11 to 12% pitch, degrees pitch, can make sense. And I'll look at a case study in a minute and build on that point. The size of the roof, clearly very important. Aging condition of the roof. Yeah, you don't want to be putting this stuff on a roof that's just about to be refurbished and only got another 5 years before it needs to be replaced. Putting on a new roof is ideal. But any roof that's sort of midlife and in good condition is okay. In-building submains, as I've pointed out, very crucial in large sites, understanding how good that is. And we've already touched upon that other point, ownership. Yes, who owns the roof and how do we get into leases and the management of that? The other key factor, absolutely critical, is how much electricity do I consume on site? And what do I do with the electricity that I generate from the solar PV? How much of it will be used on site to reduce the electricity bills? And how much of it will be sent back to the grid? And talking about grid constraints are important. You need to have a strong enough grid connection to actually be able to pump the generated power back to the grid in the worst case. And our local distribution network operator, SSE, will have to give permission before any solar PV is connected to the grid. That can take time, and it's not always granted, and sometimes there are conditions. So understanding the external grid constraints from the network side are important, and understanding the internal grid constraints of your own electrical distribution system on site is also important. Clearly there's planning constraints, but for most solar PV on most roofs that we're talking about, it's within permitted development rights. So you don't need planning permission, but that's not on every case. So how much can you install? Well, here's some rough at the bottom there, that bottom box, really saying the sorts of sizes and costs we're talking about for solar PV. So just an idea of the sorts of things that might be required from a 300 square meters for a relatively small sized 50 kilowatt system, right away up to a couple of acres or a major ground mounted solar farm type thing. What makes a good investment? Well, I mean, the key factors here in understanding whether the finance director is going to sign off on any investment in solar PV. And again, I emphasize it's an investment that makes a return. It is not a cost. The four key factors, can't count, there's 6 key factors on there, but it's how much does it cost to install? Key measure there is the number of pounds per kilowatt that's installed or pounds per megawatt. How much will it yield? So for every kilowatt that you put on the roof, how many kilowatt hours of electricity will it generate in a year? How much of that is used on site? The prices that you are currently paying for electricity has an impact, quite a considerable impact. And of course, these days it's like 3, 4, 5 times what it was a year ago. Power purchase agreements are really about what opportunities are they to sell some of the generation to third parties. And I think some of the other speakers will be talking about that one. And then how much can you sell it for and to whom? Can you sell it to the person underneath the roof? Or if you were the roof owner yourself, that's great. Do you sell it to a neighbour or sell it back to the grid? So all of those factors need to be combined, and then you can come up with an investment case to either say, yes, this is a good thing to do, or to say, no, it's not. In the vast majority of cases, it comes out to be an excellent investment. Just quickly on this consumption issue, it's about a bit like the 3 bears. It's got to be just right, not too hot, not too cold. This looks at the blue line, which is how. This is actual data of the blue line. It's the consumption on a particular site that we've just been looking at, actually, in terms of kilowatts over the time of day. Clearly, the amount of solar PV it's generated is determined by many factors, but you want to get it about right. As I say, let me just If we go along the red line and put too much solar PV on the roof, generating too much electricity at the wrong time, then all that excess electricity has to be sold back to the grid, which is not a bad thing, but you can sell it back at, say, 15p a kilowatt, which is good, but it's not the best thing to do, because you could have actually spent less money putting in a smaller system to be more optimized to the load. The amber line at the bottom is going around the other way, where you put in too smaller system, and therefore you could have generated a lot more and saved yourselves a huge amount more money. Effectively, if the average rate for electricity is 33p a kilowatt hour, you could have saved a lot more. So you want to be around about that green line, they're just about right size. And getting that right is requires quite a bit of detailed analysis to get it right. Otherwise, you're spending too much or you're spending too little. I hope that one's clear, but I'm more than happy to delve into that in more detail should anyone want to later on. So here's a case study. This is a building. It happens to be not far from Basingstoke. South is at the bottom. You can see that's a trapezoidal sheet metal roof. That's one of those standard roofs you see in a factory. The south-facing roofs are ones that are in the brighter yellow. The colours indicate the irradiance or the amount of sunlight that's falling on each roof. In this particular case, it is a huge consumer of electricity. That's about a 122 kilowatt system. Even on that north-facing roof, because it's relatively low pitched, it is still worth, in this particular case, putting it on the north-facing roof because of the amount of electricity that's built on is being used on site. So let's just sort of delve into those finances a bit, looking at that very particular opportunity that I just presented in the previous slide. It's all well and good if the system fits on the roof. The key question is, does it make money? Well, here's the results of various scenarios for this particular customer. Install cost, about 80 kilowatts. The average yield, i.e. how much electricity does it generate for every kilowatt installed, in this particular case is quite low, but that's because of that north-facing roof. More typical figures there are around about sort of 900, 920. But this particular installation would generate about 130 megawatt hours in the first year. And let's assume for the case of the very first business case, 70% of that is used on site and therefore reducing the electricity that the site has to buy from the grid. In this particular case, based on the simulation modelling that we've done, if it was sold to the roof owner or the owner of the system used it themselves, about 72 megawatt hours, 31 megawatt hours goes back to the grid. That would save about 20,500 kilograms of emissions in the first year. And at that sort of rate, you can use those numbers to combine the revenues and the costs and develop something called the internal rate of return, IRR, which just generally gives you the return on your investment. Now, on the first case, with 70% used on site, it will generate about £865,000 of revenue over 25 years. The costs, including maintenance costs and taking it away at the end of its life, £132,000. Total generation, 2.6 gigawatt hours, not bad. The return on that particular investment is 33%. That's pre-tax, obviously. But there are not many returns out there today where you can get 33% return on what is a relatively risk-free investment. Now, looking at the impact of on-site consumption is the box at the bottom. Now, in this particular case, if the site used a lot more electricity and say 100% was used on site, which is often the case these days, that the internal rate of return is now 44%. Now, if you went to your finance director offering a return on 44%, they will probably bite your hand off. Now, of course, this is not every site and every opportunity, but this is an example of a real site that is considering investing in solar PV. And those sorts of returns are not available for many other investments at the moment. Now, of course, it depends on all those other factors I've just been talking about, but these are the sorts of returns that can be generated at the moment. So, going back to my first slide, key takeaways. Hopefully I've given a little bit more depth to those statements that I made earlier on. It's all about finding a good roof. Where is it? Which direction does it point? And what's old? How old is it? How much matching generation with the consumption is absolutely critical. Making sure the internal distribution system, electrical distribution system, is good enough. In most cases it is, but it's something that you want to very carefully look at before plugging in 120 kilowatts of solar PV. Optimizing the solar PV against electricity use patterns is absolutely critical. Working out the hard business case, the numbers, is absolutely critical. Don't forget those softer benefits in terms of emission reductions. The statement it makes to your employees, your suppliers, your customers. And the other two, perhaps the other, as I say, the other real key points are the value is getting in the design and the optimization right. The installation, although complex, is a relatively straightforward, well understood process. What is critical is understanding upfront, what am I trying to get out of this system, and how do I design a system that's optimized? And hopefully, many of you who are in that survey not quite there on solar PV are now beginning to understand the potential benefits are absolutely huge. One final point, if you want to know more, come and talk to us. Thank you.
I'm muted. Martin, I'm sure that you'll be sharing your email address just on screen there if you want to just flash it on screen if anyone would like to contact Martin offline from there. At the end of each of these sessions, if you want to please write your questions into the chat, that would be great. Actually, I do have a question that came offline from here to ask you, Martin, so if I can fire away from this. And this is actually a comment on the export tariffs, which I think it's fair to say, can I say, they're a bit mean out there. You've cited us today 33 per kilowatt hour as a buying price, which probably would be, you know, I think it's going to be a bit on the low side actually going forward with an export tariffs being offered at about 15p per kilowatt hour. In my experience, that would be at the upper range of things being offered. There are much lower rates out there. I'm just wondering what's being done to kind of level that up, because it does look like everything's on the energy utility side, that there's such a gulf between our generation and being given a pittance to export versus how much they can charge.
I mean, that's
for it.
Very good question. Now, let's be clear, is there's two aspects. Is first of all, the electricity you generate and use yourself, that is worth at least 33 pence per kilowatt hour, i.e. whatever price you're paying to the grid. And as you point out, Wendy, that's you know, at the moment I'm seeing grid prices up to 60p a kilowatt hour for some people, which is just outrageous, but that's what it is. But that's the amount of money you can save by making your own electricity. The grid price, yes, that's if you have any excess generation, that's the price you can get from the grid. And again, yeah, PPA prices are jumping around all over the place. For small domestic operators, you have to use something called the Smart Export Guarantee. But even there, I'm seeing Octopus offering 15p a kilowatt hour.
Yes.
And I'm seeing numbers, you know, higher than 15 in other places. And it's a market. You just, if you're a big enough generator of electricity, all is around about 30 kilowatts, you can go out to the open market and negotiate a contract with a electricity supplier to sell your electricity. But you can see, if you've got the choice between saving electricity at 30, 40, 50p a kilowatt hour, or selling it to the grid at 15p a kilowatt hour, try to maximize the amount that you can use yourself first, and then sell any excess back to the grid, because that's the excess is worth less than the generation you can use yourself. Now, clearly, then that's where we get into the realms of batteries, which is where do I store the excess for use later on in the day or later on the next following day? But that's a completely different conversation. Happy to have that another day. But
okay, that sounds like a whole another session, which I'm sure we will take you up on the offer on that. I think Joel is monitoring the chat there. I think we've got time maybe for one or two questions there for Martin. Joel, if you want to unmute and feed those into Martin.
Okie doke. So you've already commented on battery storage, which is one of the questions that we had. So I'll move on to the next, which says, it's from Dara Jones, who says, how do you size the model where their usage pattern is heavily oriented towards winter, e.g. all winter heating.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a couple of issues. There's first of all is what are you using? What fuel is being used for heating? Now, if you're using gas, then this doesn't really help. If you're using direct electric, then it's probably better. And I should have really said this in the introduction. Actually, I mean investing in solar in renewables is great, but don't forget that you've got investments in energy efficiency can be equally as good. In fact, very often better. So for Darrow, think about how do you reduce the winter use of heating before you do anything else. But solar is by its very nature produces most of its energy in the summer, and there's nothing we can do about that. So it shouldn't be. The other point I make is never use electricity from solar PV directly to heat. Always put it through a heat pump if you possibly can. So for Darrow, the options may well be to look at how do you reduce energy demand, heating energy demand in the winter first, insulation, draft proofing, ventilation. Then think about whether you can replace fossil fueled heating with renewable options such as heat pumps, heat networks, etc.
The next question is from Graham Cleaver, and he has said, on a new build property, could the solar panels be used as the actual roof instead of fitting on the roof?
Absolutely, it can. There's the number of systems that we use, which are called roof integrated systems, where you can literally replace the tiles with solar panels. Can work out cheaper than actually doing the tiling, particularly if it's on a new build. And I've seen systems where the entire roof is solar panels, not a single tile on the roof. And I've seen, and the more common way is that a large percentage of the roof is replaced with solar panels. But again, it's getting the optimization right. If you covered the whole roof with solar panels, you might generate too much electricity, and then some would have to go back to the grid, which, by the way, isn't wasted electricity. It's just that it's the opportunity cost of that electricity.
Martin, would you estimate what the delta would be on the cost and what difference it would make to the payback time if you have a new roof with it integrated in that way? Just roughly.
Interesting. I don't know if anyone knows the Weller Road in Basingstoke. There's a new build there. The Champion Group have just put a new building up, the new headquarters. On that roof is an integrated system which we put on. It's slightly more expensive putting in roof integrated systems than putting them onto trapezoid. Slightly, it's more expensive putting in any system on a tiled roof. It's more expensive than on a sort of a warehouse metal roof always. But anyone wants to go down to Weller Road and have a look at it, you can see I think they do look quite good, and they do save money on tiling. But when they do, answer your question directly, I don't know the trade-off between them. I know what solar PV costs. I don't know what tiling costs.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we've probably got just time. Is there another question there? Just one more.
Okay. The next question comes from James Sturt. In the case study, does the 20.5 ton carbon saving take into account the manufacture, delivery and installation of the equipment?
No, it doesn't. But there's lots of something called life cycle analysis being done on solar PV generation manufacture. The latest figures are that it takes about 18 months of use for a solar PV to return the energy that's been used in its construction. And if anyone's interested, I've got sort of half a dozen case studies on life cycle analysis of solar PV panels. So that 20.5 tons doesn't, but once you've used the panels for 18 months, 2 years, you've recovered the energy that's been used in its manufacture and installation.
Excellent. I think we'll probably bring things to a little halt there. Just offline from here also, is it possible to share any documents about landlords and permissions these days? You've mentioned permitted developments, obviously where you own the building, and with the landlording issue, it would be good just to have a little link to that we could share if that's not in the links there.
I think you might find that Jane and some of the others who do the community energy systems, which is the presentation following this,
soon. Yes.
have very good experience of the sorts of leases you can enter into for solar PV, and they're pretty standard documents at the moment. So they're there. If you find a lawyer that's experienced in doing these sorts of things, it's not necessarily that expensive. These are pretty well negotiated documents now. And just quickly to answer Ed's question, we can do the scenario analysis of what does IRR look like if prices change. Absolutely, we've got financial models that do that, and indeed on some of the bigger systems, that scenario analysis and risk assessment is something we do quite often.
Great.
And my
Martin,
email address is on the slides, but
I've just shifted that over. You will be getting copies of the slide pack, and please do review all the wonderful information from this presentation on the YouTube video that will be coming out shortly afterwards. I'm going to share my screen again, and we're back onto the agenda. Please do remember to fill in that feedback form. We do want to know what subjects you want to cover, and Martin's already put a shout out there for batteries, which I think will be really good to cover. We'll move on in the interest of time then. I'm delighted to introduce we've got Alison Zarecki from Basingstoke-on-Deane Borough Council, Ollie Pendert, and also Jane Grindy are joining us for the next session. So I think Alison is going to start first. So Alison, if you'd like to grab the screen from me, that would be perfect.
Great, thank you very much, Wendy. Well, I'm Alison Zarecki. I think I know quite a few of you here. I'm a climate change project officer in Basingstoke-on-Deane Council. So I was just going to take you through a few slides on what the council are doing and how we might be able to hopefully help you with solar PV and what the role of community energy companies could be. So just a quick slide. So I'm sure you already have seen this. We've declared a climate emergency. And we have two targets. The first is that we will be a carbon neutral council by 2025, which we're making good progress on. And the second is that along with other councils, because I know not everyone here is in Basingstoke-on-Deane, many councils across the UK have declared a climate emergency. We want to help the borough become net carbon zero by 2030, which is 20 years ahead of the government target, because we feel that is inadequate. You know, we need to make progress now. But in order to do that, it's going to take, you know, every single business, every single resident is going to have to try and play their part. Here's just a little snapshot. So if you look at the emissions in the borough, we've got around 930,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. You can see a little breakdown there. Obviously, energy and transport are two huge ones. But if you look over here at the smaller sectors, you can see that commercial and industrial and the public sector do actually make a significant impact. So this is kind of what we're going to have to try and deal with. And another couple of bits of information here, statistic wise, we have high electricity consumption in the borough, 790 gigawatts, which is fine. Obviously, we need that for our power and our gadgets, our equipment. But in terms of renewables, only 3.7% of that is generated in the borough from renewables, which is really low. And that's across all of Hampshire, actually. It's very low compared to the rest of the UK. And we would really like to see that increase, particularly as we have such a sunny county here. There's a huge opportunity. And if we were to look at all of the commercial roof space in the borough, that is a significant opportunity. So obviously we'd like to see as much solar as possible on those. The other point, which you I'm sure you're aware of, we have many SMEs, I think over 8,000 in the borough. And if you aggregate the emissions from those, they are actually slightly greater than larger companies. So it's, you know, SMEs play a significant part, but they don't tend to have the resources of larger companies. So we're keen to see how we can help you. So what we are doing at the moment is we have commissioned a desktop solar capacity study from AB Solar Solutions, who are a company in Southampton, who have some really innovative software. And so the first thing that will do is it's going to quantify this big opportunity that we have. You know, how much of that demand can be met by solar rooftop on commercial properties. The second thing it will do is we want to use that information to try and help businesses. So we're going to be able to give you access to a one-page report, which is just an indicative snapshot of what possibly could be achieved. Obviously, it's nowhere near what Martin Heath would do. It's a start point to give you an indication, and it also fits with our objective of promoting local and community energy projects in the borough. So this is an example of what it might look like. This is not the final. This is not the final one. It will obviously have a disclaimer on it because it's just for illustration. But the software calculates the things Martin talked about the azimuth of the roof, the angle and the shading. It can look at how high it is. It can, we've made a number of assumptions based on industry usage, based on current prices. But obviously what we don't have is your usage and the price that you are paying, nor can we see, the structure of your roof or the state of your electricity supply. Or anything like that, but it should give you a good indication. So this is a bit just zoomed in on that. So it can give you the install capacity, the current price, how much it would generate, how much CO2 you would save. It can give you a visual, and it can give you a payback looking over 20 years. So this particular one would pay back in nearly just under 4 years. So if you are interested in that should be available at the beginning of March. If you are interested in accessing that, please do email me on the email on this presentation, and I will add you to the list. Please give me all the information because I need to know which. I will have it by building, so I need to be able to match you to the correct building. Financing. Martin's made a great case for the business case. So obviously, you can self-fund, or you can. There is a low case grant which I'm going to go through later, which could fund a third of your installation. The second option, if you don't wish to raise the finance, is that you could go down a community energy route, which Ollie and Jane will be talking a bit more about. But that would mean that the capital would be raised by the community energy company via a share offer, and they could install the solar for you. It would also generate some a community energy pot for other community energy projects. So that could also be an option. So there are 3 companies in this area. I'm sure there are more across. There's many more across the UK. So there's Caliva Energy, which Jane will talk to you about in a moment. There's also Loddon Energy, who are working closely with them, and there is Test Source Community Energy, based in Overton, and I'm a director of that in my free time. So I've put contact details on there. I've given you my the climate change inbox if you would like to email me, and also I've put the MCS accreditation website. Obviously you have Martin Heath that you could go to, but there are other installers if you needed other quotes there. So thank you very much for listening. Does anyone have any questions before I hand over to Ollie and Jane, or possibly we should maybe have questions at the end?
We have a question from Paul Brown. Does BES carry out installations in Kent?
That one will be for Martin.
Yes, that's the Martin one.
Martin,
Probably.
are you there? Can you unmute, please?
Oh.
Yeah, I'm still here. You can hear me, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
We do go outside of Basingstoke, but it tends to be only for the larger installations. It's sort of crazy us packing up loads of installers in vans and sending them all the way across the country just to put a small system on the roof of a house. But for instance, we are working in the Midlands on a 300 kilowatt installation, because it is worthwhile then, and because we try to be sort of, if you like, to be our carbon footprint as low as possible. So for small installs, it's better to use someone local, but for the bigger ones, yes, we can. So if you're talking sort of in Kent, 100 kilowatts, then definitely. Then we're also doing, potentially working with systems in Brighton at the moment as well. I think we probably stretch it, not going to Scotland, to the far north, but even for the biggest. But if it's over 100 kilowatts, then it's worthwhile for us to think about doing those across the country.
Maybe a dialogue offline from here. It'll
Yeah.
be good if Martin's details, I
Matthew
think, are
wants to
posted in
email
the
me.
chat
I'm
there.
happy to talk about it. Oh, is it? No, sorry, Paul it was, yeah.
Then we got a question from Matthew Smith, which says, just to confirm, you engaged the consultants to measure the PV potential of each building in the Basingstoke area.
Yes, that's right. Every business with a roof bigger than 30 square meters. I mean, 30 square meters is probably a small house. So yes, that will be every building. So there's going to be a lot of reports, thousands of reports. So I'll do my best. We can sift them by type of business, but we'll have to see what the data looks like when it comes in. But yes, that's what we've done.
So if I could ask Jane Grindy from Caliva Community Energy to start your presentation. Welcome, Jane.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I just have a few slides and I'm intending to give you an overview of who we are and how we approach our business and all of those sorts of things. And then hopefully if people have questions, you feel free to ask me after we go through this. So first of all, our vision was always to build a sustainable business offering community-owned, cheaper, renewable energy. So, and why we want to do that is because endless applying for grants and grants disappear and trying to make things happen and then things are in fashion and then they're not. If you have a robust community energy business that generates new funds that doesn't exist anywhere else previous to that, often because you're doing share offers, which brings in private capital, and really importantly, it's a long-term funding stream. We're in the huge privilege of not having to make immediate profits, every single year. We've got a 25-year plus horizon. And what that allows us to do is think hard about how we invest and where we invest, and ensure that actually the communities we work with helps us direct our investment and really importantly benefits from any of the funds that we actually generate through the solar we sell. And our mission is to help cut energy use and to cut costs and to cut carbon emissions. We're absolutely in that zone, and that's how we invest our surpluses. So where are we so far? We actually started way back in 2014 on Caliva Park. Many of you will know where that is. That was our first installation. We now have 17 arrays. We're trading with over 400 kilowatt peak of solar energy, on-roof solar energy at the moment. And over time, in an attempt to get more scale, we've also started developing small solar farms, and we have the rights to 2 of these, up to 3 megawatts each, and that would give us scale, which is really important, we think, going forward. We have 76 members of our Community Benefit Society, which is a not-for-profit society, and 4 volunteer directors. And we don't carry big overhead very deliberately. So when, for example, we were very successful in getting rural community energy funding recently, we outsourced quite a lot of that work. So we use professionals as and when we need them, and we make sure that that enables us to build a robust business. And the way it works is that we actually own the solar array. So rather than a business having to fund that £80,000 or whatever it is for that capital investment, we actually spend that £80,000 and fund that installation. We do that through social debt usually, or share offers, as I say, bringing in private capital, which there's a big business. There are over 300 community energy businesses across the UK now, and there is a lot of ethical investment behind those businesses, and many people invest in, once they've invested in one community benefit society, they'll invest in others. And our job then is to then manage the day-to-day action with all of those solar arrays. And I disagree a little bit with Martin. It is essential to make sure you put the right kinds of panels and the right rooftops and the electricity, etc., is calculated in the correct way. Don't have any issue with that. However, our practical experience, we've been trading since 2014, as I say, is that the installer actually really does matter. We have big differences depending on who installed which array, on how many problems we've had since they've been installed. So I would say watch that. And so we cover insurance, we cover maintenance, we replace components, inverters or meters, we manage billing services, And we obviously also manage all the community investment when we have the surpluses to do so. On the other side, our property partners, what we ask is we ask for a long-term lease, and we ask for a long-term power purchase agreement. And the two things are often with different groups of people. So if we go back to Cleaver Park for a moment, those of you who know it, it's a commercial business park, and there are many landlords, there's a freeholder, and there are many tenants, and the properties in the unit, sometimes the landlord is also the tenant, sometimes they're not. Sometimes the landlord changes when a unit is sold, but the tenant remains, and then often the tenants are changing constantly. So we are very experienced in that area, and the really important thing is that the lease is signed with the people, the freeholders first of all, of course, but the people that actually hold the rights to the airspace. So whose roof is it? Really matters. And then the power purchase agreement is signed with the people who actually consume the energy. So we generate, and then whatever's exported is not used, and we bill for the bit in the middle, the stuff that's actually consumed on the premises. And then all we ask beyond that is access for any operations and maintenance activity. And then we have always traditionally invested some of our surpluses back into those properties themselves, because our commercial world also needs energy efficiency investment, as Alison has so rightly said. Some of the things we have, these are just a few of the things we've done. So for example, on Cleaver Park, we've invested in LED for businesses there, and we've also invested in roof insulation, and we've done energy efficiency audits. For example, the Tadley Community Centre, which is just down our road, and we've funded energy support programs through the local Citizens Advice Bureau. And we also are quite keen on sort of trying to support the general development of renewable energy, actually. So we're also supporting a innovative tracker development project, and we will cite trackers on Barlows Park shortly, and that will benefit the development of renewable energy in the UK, of course, but what it does is it gives really low cost energy to the football players. So that's all I really wanted to say on my presentation. So it was a brief overview, and there's an awful lot of detail under there I'm very happy to talk about. Or anyone can get in touch with me directly on those details, should that be what you would like to do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jane, for that. Very fascinating. I think, a question I can see already there in the chat. Obviously, a lot of people are in the area here today. There's also a lot who are outside of the sort of Basingstoke, Rushmore, Hart districts, who are asking, how do we find the community energy projects? How do we get involved in that on a broader basis? Yeah, that would be very good to have your advice on that.
Okay, so most community energy businesses, societies, I call them businesses because actually we are a social enterprise. Actually, we have to be viable. If we've got ambitions for long-term investment in our local communities, then in the way that Martin explained, we have to make sure that what we invest in actually does give us a return, to make sure that we're a sustainable business over time. And there are, as I say, over 300 community benefit societies. And there's you can find one because there is something called Community Energy England, and they actually have a map, and they actually post every community energy society they know about on that map. So if you're nowhere near us, then, and we're very happy to talk to anyone who wants to talk to us, then there are others out there. And so go to Community Energy England. That's a fast way to find them.
Right, that's what you need to Google, folks. So maybe Joel or Zoe might pop that in the chat, actually, if you could just have a look at that online there. Any more questions there? I think Joel's had a look at those.
Well, there are some more questions, but I had a question, which was, have people or businesses had any issues selling the properties for which you own the sort of airspace lease?
Okay, and the answer is no. So our leases are long term, and in fact, the opposite. Sometimes having solar on the roof is an advantage, and people are looking for more carbon neutral properties actually. But our all we have in our lease is there's a couple of clauses which say, you buying this property with our solar on your roof, agree to keep that property, that solar on the roof, and abide by the terms and conditions in the lease. And you buying this unit with the solar on the roof, agree to abide by the terms and conditions of the PPA. So it's a very simple thing. So if you're going to buy the unit, then you're not allowed to take our solar off. Or, well, you could actually. There's always a break clause within the lease. So people can buy out, they don't have to sign a 25-year lease and then never be allowed to get out of that, that you can always buy your way out of it. So no, it's not actually caused any problems whatsoever that we know about. And we've bought and sold quite a lot over the years.
Ed Duggan has asked the question, how do we find our local community energy group?
Yeah, I think Alison has now put the link on the chat.
Brilliant.
And as I say, the first place I would start is Community Energy England, and because they have the map. Okay.
And we have, please can you elaborate on what the tracker project is?
Yes, so trackers are for people with ground space. This is not a rooftop option, but the idea is that the solar isn't fixed in one position. So as the sun moves, so does the solar panels on a mechanism that actually turns it to face the sun. So it's a way to optimize how much energy you generate within the space. And it's fantastic for small pieces of land, for example, next to railway stations or other sites like that, where there aren't vast acres that you can put solar on. And in other countries around the world, trackers are very, very prevalent, but they tend to be really big, and wouldn't go down so well with your neighbours if you tried to put them in Britain. But the project that we're working with at the moment, they have no more height than a normal solar panel, and they're a really interesting, good project actually. So it's all about making the most of what we have from a renewable sense.
Okie dokie. So that question was from Elizabeth Lunn. The next one is from Matthew Smith, and it says, have you been able to source any grant funding for the PV installations to date, or is it mainly share offers, etc.?
So quite often it depends on who our property partner is actually. So there are grants. So for example, the Rural Community Energy Fund no longer exists, unfortunately, but they will help on bigger development projects. So they helped us with our solar farm developments in the past. In some, not actually with Kaliva, I have a hat on which works also in Milton Keynes. And one of our rooftop partners there, it was a public sector building, and there was a way to use carbon offset funding to help pay for the solar generation. What that does is it improves the business model, so it means that they pay far less. We still carry all the risk for them, we still manage the site for them, but what they pay is a much lower energy price. So there are pockets of funding out there, and really depends on who you are in terms of who owns the building and what it's used for. So keep a lookout.
We've got a question from Ian Dodgson, which says, do these community energy groups buy excess electricity at an agreed very low cost?
Do we buy? We wish we could. The Germans do that brilliantly. At the moment, the law doesn't allow us to do that. And there is a bill that's been trying to get through Parliament called the Local Electricity Bill. And that might help us to do that. But at the moment, all we can do is we have to, so our solar, when we put solar on the roof, you have to connect it into an existing MPAN. Mm-hmm. So we connect into the roof underneath. What we can't do is then take a trail of that electricity and send it to a building down the road. That's legal. As soon as you hit the grid, so you can private wire it, which means that you don't go through the grid. But as soon as you hit the grid, that's all. That's as far as you can go. That was a really quick way to say that. So I hope that sort of basically made sense. But you can't. you can't randomly sell energy at the moment across from source to anyone you like.
Jane, could I just elaborate on that? I think I was there was an excellent programme on Radio 4 which really was concentrating on community energy and private wire type arrangements of what the biggest setup. It might have been in a domestic situation, but how far do people go at the moment with that kind of private wire arrangement?
Okay, so there is a project I'm involved in, again, not with Caliva, but where it's a brand new development, 115 homes, and it's actually being developed incorporating a microgrid. What that means is that you stop the connection with the grid officially before you get into the 115 home estate, and then there's a battery, there's solar, and then the private wiring. So the wiring is owned by the people who own the freeholders basically of the building, and then that means that you can share the energy that's generated on the roof, and you can distribute it through the battery in the microgrid system. So there are ways around that, but it's very, very hard to retrofit, very expensive to retrofit.
So I'm taking that was a new build.
That's a new build,
development, yeah.
Yeah.
And whereabouts? Can you say where that is at the moment? That sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, so that's in the process of being built, and it's a project called the Agora Redevelopment Project in a place called Wolverton, which is in Milton Keynes.
Ah, okay.
So it's brand new. So the planet, they literally just knocked down the old building and are rebuilding at the moment. But those microgrids are the future, obviously.
Yes, I think, for the current problems and cost of living crisis, that will be generating, that stability and that element of control for the householders. I'm sure there's is there a figure of how much, I guess at today's rate, they would be paying effectively for their electricity from one of those microgrids there?
I can't quote that directly, but one of the advantages of being a massive new build is that it's a really high energy efficiency standards.
Yes.
So the energy bills are plummeting. Basically, they will pay very, very little for their energy, and the energy that they are buying will be mostly generated on site. So this is the way we should be building it's actually, personally, I find it shocking we build anything without renewable energy at the moment. It's a bit, I'm sure everyone on this call is similarly shocked. But it's absolutely the way we should be building our new homes. But as I say, it's very, very difficult to. So there are other schemes, other countries do this, and the local electricity bill is trying to address this, which is about sharing your excess with your neighbours through a third party sort of purchasing scheme in effect. But it is about balancing generation.
Do you think there'll be some change in legislation to permit more microgrids? To say there are limitations, obviously, on that at the moment. Does it need some kind of reform to really enable that to flourish?
I think that I think we need an ambitious renewable energy policy from government, and I think we're way off where we should be personally. But I can't see it happening in the short term, sadly.
Okay, that's fascinating. Probably not ours to get into the realms of politics this morning, but I think that gives a really, really clear vision of the future. I will then pass back now to Alison Zarecki, who's going to talk to us about funding.
Great, thank you very much, Wendy. Okay, so I'm not from Locase. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here today, but I'm just going to run through the presentation so that everyone can understand what it is. So it stands for, you may well have heard of this already, because I'm sure we've presented this a number of times at the SBN. The Locase is low carbon across the Southeast programme. So it is intended to stimulate demand, to support supply, and to encourage innovation. So looking at hoping, wanting businesses to adopt low carbon solutions, energy efficiency schemes. So of course, solar PV would fit very nicely into this. It covers this whole area here. So it covers can't display content. Okay, let's try that again. Right, can everyone see that?
That's great, Alison. Thank you.
Fine. I don't know what happened there. Okay, now it's so small on my screen, I'm struggling to read it. Okay, I think we were on this next slide, weren't we? So it covers all of those areas there. Oh, it covers all of those areas there. And here is a list of councils. So it's a sort of consortium of a number of councils there, and also university partners and all of the LEPs. So it's not just a grant, it's also one-to-one support and to help you make good decisions with what you need to do in terms of renewable or green products. So what type of support can you get? Well, there are two types. The first one is the financial support. So it's a match funding. So you get a third as a grant and you have to fund the other 60%. So the minimum is £1,000 grant. So if you had a £3,000 project, you would have to fund 2,000, you would get 1,000. The maximum now has increased from 10,000 to 20. It also now can include some community organisations potentially as well, because I think that it's a European fund and there clearly are funds, and you need to be applying quite soon because they've got to be spent by June. So I would, if there is a project that you're looking to do, I would urge you to apply and see if that is suitable for you. And the non-financial support is quite considerable. So they will do a needs assessment. They can do an energy audit, which would be a very, very useful thing. Sector-based business engagement and networking events, which they can let you know about. Also, access to training programs. So, for example, the STEM program. And they give one-to-one business support. So hopefully that will be of use. What can it fund? It can fund many things. So energy efficiency measures, including PV, so which is why we thought we'd talk about it, but it can fund anything that's green. So there's a whole list of things here. So transport efficiency, development costs, it can be plant and machinery. It can also be consultancy costs. So if you have marketing costs or any green products, that can also be funded. It's really hard to read this. Where am I? Are you eligible? So here is the list. So you must fit the SME criteria. So less than 250 employees and turnover less than 50 million, balance sheet less than 43 million. It must take place within the LEP area in which you're applying. You must be able to have the other 2/3 of the funding available, and you should not be in a restricted sector, which I'll come on to on the next slide. And you shouldn't just, oh, where's that disappeared to? Right. Right, I think so. For my apologies, my system seems to be playing up. So they have, there are a number of restricted sectors which are listed there, such as fisheries, education, primary production, banking and insurance. So unfortunately, if you're in one of those sectors, you won't be able to apply, but hopefully some of you will be able to. If you go to the Locase website, they have various videos and case studies. So there's just a little example there. There was this is indoor bowls, and they had some low energy lighting and a solar powered access system. But you can find out more on the website. And how long have we got? We don't have very much time at all, either to save the planet or to apply for this. So it would be something that you would have to address quite soon. I mean, Martin and Jane might be able to give you some more deadlines, but if you were looking to get solar PV installed and get that sorted out before June, it would require some quite swift movement. And then on when you get the slide pack, you can see there's all the information and contact details are there. So hopefully that is sufficient information. There was just one other thing I wanted to mention. In terms of other SME support, Basingstoke-on-Deane have also, we're doing a trial with SMEs. We're looking for a small number of SMEs, ideally those who haven't really started looking at their carbon footprint, because we're doing a sort of one-to-one, trying to help you measure your carbon emissions with looking to produce case studies from these businesses. So if you are interested in being a case study for us, please do get in touch. I've put a link in there to the application form. We're trying to get a range of businesses from micro through to larger SMEs in different sectors. So because each business is so different, to try and help overcome some of the barriers, you know, because it's a challenging thing to do. This is new for a lot of us. We've not had to do this before. So if you are interested, please do get in touch and be part of our pilot. And that's all from me. So does anyone have any questions?
Well, thank you, Alison. I think that the resounding message from that is grab it whilst you can in terms of the funding. So that's what I'd say with that. Can I just say there, obviously we've got, there's a very, very limited lifespan on that. There are other grants from various different bodies available. And the best I can think of at the moment is to have a look on Green Grants Machine was always a good website to look to see what funding you could get if you are outside of the area or want to find something that maybe has a longer time frame, or indeed if you're in one of those sectors that isn't permitted to apply for the low case funding. Just to say that there, I think we do have one or two questions coming up, so I think Joel's going to take us through those.
Yep, so a number of questions just came in. We had one from Ed Duggan, which says, I am outside low case area. How do I find my local alternative?
I think that's kind of on the Green Grants Machine, isn't it, really, Alison? Do you know any more?
I don't
to go looking.
I think that sounds like a good thing to do. And I think there's another question as well. No, I don't think it can be extended. Because it was applied for, it's a European funds, and it's set in stone, which I think is probably why they've increased the amount. So we have had quite a few applications in Basingstoke, but obviously there is more there if you're eligible.
Okey-doke. So I think you've pretty much covered the questions that were there. Hang on. Someone said probably a question to Martin and Jane. PV panels from China has inherent associated labour standards, issues, risks associated with it. Is this assessed anywhere?
I can answer that one. Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes, Martin.
Yeah, I mean, this is we because of our social objectives, we look at our supply chain quite carefully on this issue. Yeah, there's some big issues on, certainly on the cheaper panels, of forced labour coming in from Chinese panels. So what we tend to do, there's a very good report by Sheffield University, Sheffield University actually, on supply chains in solar panels, and that gives some comfort on which of the panels coming from China are, if you like, the cleanest. So we tend to use, we always use those ones that are coming top of that list, and avoid using ones that are in any way sort of have a dubious, shall we say, provenance. Clearly, there's also just coming onto the market now some good European manufactured panels. Biomea is in particular, it's a very good supplier who make all of their panels, and including the fabrication of the silicon, which is another key area to think about. So you have to look at the whole supply chain for a solar module, right from the fabrication of the silicon right the way through to manufacture the modules itself. And so there's now a fabrication plant just opening up, or just being invested in Norway, for instance. And then in Germany, there's huge investment going into solar module manufacturing. Unfortunately, nothing in the UK. There's one small, very small UK developer of modules, but they buy all their silicon from outside the UK. So yeah, absolutely. Something that if you really want to get into the ethics of this, it's something that definitely should be considered, and look at those modules and where they're coming from. And happy to give advice on that, actually. And as I say, we select and use panels that we think are the better of the panels on the marketplace.
Great. Very important.
Thank you for that. It looks like we've gotten through all the questions that are currently there.
Great. Okay, I think you've got all the presenters' details there if you wanted to ask a question privately from that. So I'm now going to do a shameless plug for our next session that we're doing. And we're going to be focusing on net zero, what the updates are, and we're going to be looking at carbon offsetting and where carbon removal fits within that as it starts to come through. So that session is going to be hosted by my SBN colleague, Dr. Duncan East from Marwell. And that's the date, the 24th of March. We're online and free again. Now, this QR code isn't the sign-up form, unfortunately, but what it is the feedback for today. So please could you take a moment to fill that in. So please raise your phones again. Then the final thing to do is obviously to say a big thank you to all our presenters today for a vast amount of knowledge on this subject area. And these sessions could only take place with the contributions from the 3 councils listed there, Basingstoke and Dean, Rushmore and Hart. So thank you to the councils for supporting these sessions.
We've got a whole video library of past SBN sessions for you to watch online, so follow the link below to go and check those out. Thanks so much for joining us today and watching this SBN video, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.